All right, hello and welcome to another video tutorial. So I'm just going to quickly give you a breakdown on how to update from the older versions of Storyteller to the Storyteller version 2020.5 and up. All right, so the first thing that you need to do is open up your scene, and you're probably going to see a bunch of errors if you're using legacy code from the old Storyteller, but that's a non-issue, as you'll see. All right, so we're in our scene, you're in your scene, and you see error, just ignore it. That's gonna be gone soon. All right, so I'm gonna create an empty game object here. And the reason we're creating an empty game object is because for Storyteller and the GameBridge tools, you no longer need the dialogue component. You no longer need the character component because we have a new system here, and it's called the interaction. So let's add an interaction component. And if we look inside of our scripts folder here, we see all of the relevant tools that we need. The most important one here is the interaction component. So we added a new game object in the scene, and we put the interaction component on it, and it also added automatically an interaction trigger manager. All right. And the interaction trigger manager is what manages the triggering of interactions. So for example, when this player walks up to an NPC, an interaction needs to be triggered to allow for our player or main character to interact with that NPC in whatever way it needs to. All right, so as you can see here in our inspector, in our interaction, we need a scene data. And the scene we're working with here is the NPC walk up. Actually, let me just open up that in the Storyteller too. And the reason you see two different Storytellers here, it's two different stories, sorry, is because one of them is a backup. So what happens now is that whenever you save your project, by default, we create a backup of your story so that, well, nothing bad happens to it. So in your settings here, you see, if you can find it, where is it? Auto backup is on. You can turn that off if you want. It's best to leave it on. Anyway, so we're just gonna put in the scene data here. NPC walk up. There we go. And just like that, everything has been automatically set up. So before, you need to actually click a button to do the setup, but now all it is put in the scene data and it sets up itself. If you update your scene data, it will automatically set up itself also. Now the interaction component handles linear and non-linear interactions automatically. The older components, you needed a character component for non-linear and a dialogue for linear. That's no longer the case now. So depending on the type of interaction we want, in this case non-linear, we're just going to select non-linear, and there we go. Now for those of you who already have a pre-existing project and were using the old character components or the old dialogue components, then you probably want your old information back and you want it in the new system. That's actually quite easy to do here. So if we just fold these up here just to reduce any kind of confusion. If we look here in the inspector, it says update from dialogue or character. That's currently turned off. Let's click it, turn that on. And we can see that it's requesting a target dialogue. Well, we're not using the dialogue here. We were using character components. So it's asking for the number of characters, and we have 6 characters in this scene. Let's put 6, and let's drag these characters in. They don't have to be dragged in order. Let's just drag them in. And click import, and we're done. All of our information from our previous characters are now in the new system. I'm just going to hide that by turning it off again. So if we open out our conditions here, general conditions, we see all of the general condition data that was taken from the the old character components is now in the new interaction system. So too are the conditions, the no specific conditions that were in the old character component. Now, if you see anything missing here, it's probably it is because it was tied to some old legacy code data from the old Storyteller project, from the old Storyteller. So what you'd have to do is just reassign it. So I know that for this one, it's definitely going to be the interaction system, interaction dot continue on route. When you see the data missing there, it's likely because the character component is no longer on the referenced game object, because when we did the import of the old data, we removed the character components from it. And next thing you want to do is some cleanup, because we're using this whole new system here. There's probably some old unnecessary data that's left behind, deleted scripts. So for example, here on my player, there was a script here. I don't remember what that was, but it's not necessary anymore. So let's remove it. And yeah, there we go. Everything should be fine now. The only thing that we have to do here is just set up our interactions. How do we want the interactions to play out? I know we did have this set up in the old project, but in a new project, you'd have to make a couple of changes. Like for example, cleaning up unnecessary general conditions here, like these. Like these aren't necessary. No, this one or this. Yeah, so these are the general conditions that we need for this particular interaction. And what we're going to need to do next is, remember in the old character component, we had to have entire character components on each NPC. We don't need that anymore. Let's select the NPCs and let's give them an interactable character component. And let's give them the scene data. And when you give them the scene data, you need to also tell them which route value they have. I mean, we're using nonlinear, so they need to know which route value they have, just like we did before when we're using the character components. So this is route 0, and this is going to be NPC 1. For NPC 2, it's on the 1 index. So we're going to set that to 1 for NPC 2. NPC 3 is on the 2 index. So let's go to NPC 3 and let's give it 2, the value 2 for NPC 2. And for NPC 4, that's not in our route list. So let's go ahead and give it that scene data and turn off use route button. Uses route. It should be the uses route number button. Let's go ahead and turn that off and set it to NPC 4. For NPC 5, let's set that to route number 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. And that's it. And on the player, let's add a collision interaction trigger. And we're adding the collision interaction trigger on the player because the player, for this particular character in this particular game, has the capsule collider on this game object. So let's add the interaction trigger. And on these little squares here are what this player's capsule collider is going to collide with to trigger an interaction. That's one of the ways you can interact. It's not the only way. We can start an interaction by clicking a button and telling the interaction manager to begin an interaction. Anyway, just finish setting this up. So let's click on these little trigger areas, these little colored squares here, which are really just sprites with a box collider on them. Let's grab each of them. And let's remove this old component, which is probably the NPC trigger. And now let's add the collision interaction receiver. So our player has the collision interaction trigger component, and these squares here have a collision interaction receiver. On the collision interaction trigger component that we put on our player that has the capital collider, it wants to know the tag of the squares that it wants to interact, trigger the interaction through. So the tag is going to be NPC, because each of these squares are given the tag NPC. And the collision interaction trigger component also wants to know what the interaction component is. And so let's just give it our interaction component here. And that's it. So whenever we enter an interaction, if you enter into a collision interaction receiver area, our collision interaction trigger is going to interact with it and tell the tell our interaction trigger manager to begin an interaction. All right, and there's another way you can actually do an interaction. Let's say, for example, you want to click a button to begin an interaction. We have a button here, and there's our missing data from whatever previous code we had, object reference we had on it. Let's now give it the interaction system, and let's say interaction trigger manager, begin interaction with an interactable character. And the interactable character is the NPC1. We want to interact with this one. So this is NPC1 right here. Interactable character NPC1. There we go. And say, for example, our click listeners now. These click listeners allow you to switch between routes. So if you remember, route dialog is displayed in form of buttons. You don't actually need to use buttons to switch routes. You can use whatever function you want to switch routes, as long as you set the appropriate route value. So for a click listener here, what we're going to do, it's actually set up already, so you can see the icon on it. So if we click on any one of these, then we can also make it trigger a function. We just simply put an event on it here. So if we click on this, what's it called, a rum bottle, then we're going to go to route 1. If we click on the milk bottle here, we're going to go to route 0. You can see the value here. And you can actually, when you click on it, you can make it actually trigger a different function. Yeah, but that's all. You really need to actually be able to upgrade from your old Storyteller project, your old game project, to make it use this new system. So let's do this again. So I'm going to open the scene without saving it and create an empty game object. Let's add a interaction, NPC walk up. I'm going to do it quickly this time since I've shown you once before. Right. And there we go. And then we just simply need to do again NPC and route 0 for NPC 1. For 2 it'd be 1. For 3 it would be 2. For 4 it would be none. For 5 it would be 3. And we want to interact with the NPC. The interaction it wants is this, and that's it. And that's all you need to do to be able to set this up. And then you just need to do some cleanup in the scene and you're fine. The same thing with the dialogger, except when you're using dialogger, you don't need to assign any of the interactable characters to it, to any game object. All you need to do is have your interaction system. Alright, so thanks for watching, and there'll be more videos after this. This is just the video showing you how to do the update. There's going to be a whole other video on working with Storyteller from start to finish, again covering the basics right back to where we are now, where we actually take the data, use it in game. I'm going to show you that from start to finish. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next videos.